Let's get right into it. Number 10. Rat catcher. Picture this. You wake up in 17th century Europe, stretch, yawn, and say to yourself, time to catch some plague-infested rats before breakfast. That's not an intrusive thought, that's literally your job. Rat catchers were the unlucky souls tasked with controlling rodent populations back when people thought germ theory was a spooky bedtime story and washing your hands was considered optional, like flossing. Their daily grind involved crawling into infested basements, poking around sewers, and grabbing squeaking, disease-loaded fur missiles with their bare hands. Sometimes they used dogs or ferrets, but a lot of the time, it was just them, a stick, and blind optimism. The irony? Rat catchers weren't just pest control, they were also plague couriers. Half the time, the only thing they caught was a high fever and a one-way ticket to an early grave. But here's the kicker. People actually liked rat catchers. They were basically the rock stars of filth. Imagine people cheering for you while you pull a twitching rat out of your sleeve like some deranged magician. Of course, rock star here means your life expectancy was roughly the same as a carton of milk left in the sun. You were useful, sure, but only until the plague decided you looked extra snackable that day. Basically, being a rat catcher meant you were the medieval equivalent of working tech support. Everybody needed you, nobody respected you, and you probably died from the job. Number 9. Resurrectionist. So, let's say you're in 18th century London and you need a side hustle. Driving a carriage? Too boring. Selling bread? Too honest. How about digging up fresh corpses for medical students? Yes, congratulations, you're now a resurrectionist. Doctors desperately needed bodies to study anatomy because apparently medical schools frowned upon cutting open random, still-breathing patients. Problem was, the law only allowed cadavers from executed criminals, which wasn't nearly enough to keep the scalpels busy. Enter the resurrectionists, grave diggers by night, entrepreneurs by questionable morals. You and your buddies would sneak into graveyards with shovels, lanterns, and the subtlety of raccoons in a trash can. Your goal? Snatch a body, deliver it to a medical school, and get paid more money than most people made in a month. Romantic, right? Except it was also insanely dangerous. Families started booby-trapping graves with iron cages, gunpowder, and even dead man's alarms, because nobody wanted grandma turning into tomorrow's anatomy lesson. If you got caught, you weren't just arrested, you risked being beaten by angry mobs who thought you were literally robbing souls. And if you did succeed, you had the privilege of dragging a cold, limp corpse through the night while whispering, totally worth it. So yeah, resurrectionists were the middlemen between death and science. Think Uber Eats, but for cadavers, and the delivery fee might cost you your life. Number 8. Leech Collector. Imagine trudging through a swamp in the 1800s, barefoot, with your skirts hiked up, because your paycheck depends on letting dozens of blood-sucking worms latch onto your body. Welcome to the glamorous life of a leech collector. Doctors back then were obsessed with balancing the humors, which basically meant if you had a headache, they'd slap a bunch of slimy vampires on your forehead and call it medicine. Demand for leeches skyrocketed, so armies of poor villagers, mostly women and children, were sent into ponds and marshes to harvest them the old-fashioned way, with their own flesh. The process was simple. Step 1. Walk into swamp. Step 2. Stand very still while leeches attach to your skin like tiny, wet USB sticks. Step 3. Peel them off, throw them in a jar, and try not to faint from blood loss. Oh, and don't forget the infections, because nothing says dream career like losing a leg to swamp rot. These people weren't just providing medicine, they were the medicine. And the pay? Miserable. Sometimes the collectors lost so much blood they passed out mid-shift. Others developed anemia so severe they could barely stand. But hey, at least the doctors made a fortune sticking leeches on everyone from kings to farmers. So, if you've ever complained about your job being soul-sucking, just remember, at least it's not literally blood-sucking. Number 7. Gong Farmer. You ever had a job so bad you can smell it just thinking about it? Well, meet the Gong Farmers of Tudor England, whose entire career was basically professional poop collector. Yep, this was a real, government-recognized job. Their task? Emptying cesspits, privies, and basically anything full of human waste. Think of them as medieval plumbers, except without the Mario-level fun, coins, or the possibility of a clean shirt. The shift started at night because, apparently, no one wanted to watch you scoop mountains of fermented human leftovers into buckets. By lantern light, you'd lower yourself into a pit of raw sewage, sometimes waist-deep, sometimes higher, and shovel it into barrels. And here's the kicker. All that delightful cargo had to be hauled away by cart and dumped somewhere far enough so the noble folk didn't gag on the smell during brunch. Of course, health risks were everywhere. Falling into the muck wasn't just gross, it could literally kill you. The methane fumes in cesspits were strong enough to suffocate you mid-shovel. Plenty of Gong farmers keeled over on the job, which is one hell of a way to go, drowned in a puddle of medieval Taco Bell aftermath. The pay was decent compared to other peasant jobs, but at what cost? You couldn't exactly stroll into a tavern afterward and expect anyone to sit near you. Basically, being a Gong farmer was proof that sometimes history really was just one long, disgusting dare. Number 6. Powder Monkey. Imagine you're 12 years old. These days, you'd be playing Minecraft or avoiding gym class. But back in the age of sail, your job might have been sprinting around a cannon deck during a naval battle with bags of gunpowder strapped to your little body. Congratulations, you're a powder monkey. Powder monkeys were usually young boys, sometimes even orphans, chosen for their speed, agility, and small size. Their job was to ferry gunpowder from the ship's magazine, basically a floating bomb room, to the cannons during battle. Picture it. Cannonballs are whizzing past your head, the deck is splintering beneath your feet, men are screaming, and you're just trying not to drop the very thing that could blow the ship sky high. Oh, and about that magazine room, it was so sensitive that a single spark could turn everyone into confetti. Which means you had to tiptoe in there like a nervous cat burglar and then sprint back across the chaos carrying a satchel of pure kaboom. And no, you didn't get hazard pay. You barely got paid at all. Being a powder monkey was equal parts terrifying and tragic. These kids weren't heroes because they wanted to be, they were heroes because adults looked at them and thought, yeah, small enough to fit in tight spaces, perfect for explosive delivery duty. Basically, they were Amazon Prime with a death wish. Number 5. Plague Doctor. You've probably seen the beaked mask, right? Looks like a goth bird who shops at Spirit Halloween. But behind the spooky aesthetic was one of the most terrifying jobs in history, Plague Doctor. During outbreaks of the Black Death, plague doctors were hired to treat the sick, record death tolls, and sometimes perform autopsies. Their outfits were designed to protect them. A long leather coat, gloves, and that famous mask stuffed with herbs, vinegar-soaked cloth, and maybe a sprig of lavender, because apparently, rosemary was the medieval version of pee-pee. The beak was supposed to filter miasma, or bad air, which everyone thought was the cause of disease. Spoiler, it didn't work. So your daily life as a plague doctor meant walking through streets where half the population was rotting, entering homes that smelled like despair, and poking buboes with primitive instruments while trying not to vomit into your mask. People saw you coming and knew death was already in the neighborhood. It's like being an ambulance, but instead of saving lives, you were just there to watch the clock run out. The pay? Surprisingly good. Cities basically bribed doctors to stick around, offering fat salaries and sometimes hazard bonuses. But the survival rate for plague doctors? Not great. Many ended up as just another statistic, proving that lavender-scented air filters aren't much help against fleas carrying Yersinia pestis. So yeah, being a plague doctor was basically cosplay with extra body bags. Number 4. Whipping Boy. Imagine being a kid and getting punished every time your best friend messed up. No, not because you were a bad influence, because your best friend happened to be a royal prince, and nobody was allowed to lay a finger on him. Enter the whipping boy, possibly the worst friend zone in human history. In certain European courts, especially in England during the 15th to 17th centuries, young princes were considered too sacred to punish. You couldn't spank, scold, or even ground them without offending divine right or ticking off the king. So the solution was simple. Assign the prince a buddy whose entire existence revolved around taking the hits on his behalf. So, the prince misbehaves in class? You get flogged. He talks back to the tutor? You get whipped. He sets the palace drapes on fire just to see what happens? Guess who's limping home that day? The idea was that the prince would feel guilty watching his friends suffer and therefore learn self-control. Spoiler, it didn't really work. If you grow up knowing someone else gets punished for your tantrums, you're basically on the fast track to becoming the worst roommate in college history. Whipping boys lived close to the princes and sometimes even became lifelong companions. But their job description was basically professional punching bag. It's like if your boss made you stand in for their speeding tickets, or your sibling got you grounded for crimes they committed. Except, instead of detention, it was a leather strap across your back. In short, the whipping boy was living proof that privilege means never having to say you're sorry. Number 3. Knocker up. Before alarm clocks were cheap and smartphones could scream at you with digital roosters, there was the knocker up, a job that sounds like an innuendo but was really just industrial-era human snooze buttons. In 19th and early 20th century Britain, factories ran on strict schedules, and being late could mean losing your job. But since mechanical alarm clocks were too expensive for most workers, poor folks hired someone to make sure they got out of bed on time. That someone was the knocker-up. Armed with a long pole, pea shooter, or even just a sharp knock with their bare knuckles, knocker-ups would walk the streets before dawn, tapping on windows until their clients stirred awake. Sometimes they had hundreds of houses to cover, memorizing which window belonged to who. Imagine a whole street being softly poked awake by a small army of human roosters with sticks. Sounds harmless, right? But picture doing this in the freezing dark every day, rain or shine, with angry factory workers screaming, 5 more minutes, while you jab their glass. And you'd better not miss anyone, because if you overslept or skipped a house, that worker could lose their job, and then your own pay was toast. Plus, in some rough neighborhoods, being the one to wake everyone up wasn't exactly the safest gig. People didn't always like being shaken out of their dreams by a stranger with a stick. So yes, before the invention of cheap alarm clocks, human beings actually were the alarm clocks. Which makes you wonder, who woke up the knocker-up? Probably their mother yelling, "Get to work, you're late for waking people up." Number 2. Sin Eater. Now here's one that really takes the cake. Actually, it ate the cake. In parts of Britain and Wales up until the 19th century, some families believed sins could be transferred by food. Enter the Sin Eater, the most depressing caterer you'll ever meet. When someone died, the family would place bread, salt, or sometimes even a full meal on the corpse's chest. The Sin Eater's job was to sit down, eat it, and symbolically absorb the dead person's sins into themselves. Congratulations, you've just become a walking moral landfill. Sin Eaters were usually outcasts, poor villagers desperate enough to take coin in exchange for eternal damnation. Nobody liked them, nobody trusted them, and people would literally cross the street to avoid them. Because hey, if your career choice is human sponge for bad vibes, people assume you're spiritually radioactive. Imagine going house to house, eating sadness casserole off corpses, and knowing every bite meant society saw you as dirtier than the grave you were standing over. And after the ceremony? No thanks, no handshake, just a few pennies and the knowledge that you'd never live down the stench of death clinging to your reputation. The Sin Eater's whole existence was basically an unpaid internship for hell. And all for what? Bread that's been resting on Uncle George's cold chest hair. Delicious. Number 1. Executioner. If you think your job comes with pressure, try being the guy whose performance review depends on whether the crowd boos you for not chopping off a head cleanly enough. Welcome to the glamorous, horrifying, and strangely bureaucratic life of an executioner. Executioners have existed in just about every society with laws, and their role was as straightforward as it was grim. Make sure punishments got carried out, whether that meant hanging, burning, chopping, or some creative combo platter depending on the century. You'd think that swinging an axe would be simple. Swing, thunk, job done. But nope. Botch it, and the victim screamed, the crowd rioted, and your reputation plummeted faster than the head you were supposed to remove. In medieval Europe, executioners were often social outcasts. People despised them in public but desperately needed them to keep justice rolling. You couldn't exactly invite the town hangman over for tea without raising eyebrows. Their kids couldn't get regular jobs, their wives were shunned at markets, and the whole family became a walking reminder of death. Yet at the same time, executioners were paid fairly well and sometimes given perks like free lodging or even beer allowances. Imagine being hated by everyone in your village but also being the only guy with a steady paycheck and a guaranteed seat at the tavern. The mental toll must have been brutal. One day you're tasked with burning a witch, the next hanging a thief, and then maybe torturing someone for information. That's not just a job, that's a recurring nightmare you get paid to live through. Basically, being an executioner was the historical equivalent of being a celebrity everyone recognizes but nobody wants to sit next to on the bus. Respect, fear, and loathing served in equal measure with every swing of the blade. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.